Hello everyone. As been introduced, I'm Liam, and I'm going to talk about OT hacking today. Just an intro, nothing too technical. Any sort of technical questions, I'm thick as mint, so I probably can't answer them anyway, but I'll try my best. Because I'm a sheep, I'm going to also do a who am I. I'm Liam, I'm a senior pen tester at KPMG, and a bit of a nerd, but that's about it really. So, just before I begin, quick word from the sponsor, which is printers. And they've asked me to say, it's about time the focus is on someone else. So, what am I going to talk about today? I did get a little bit carried away, forgetting that it's only 15 minutes, but I will try and speed run through all the boring bits. A few definitions, some small differences between OT and IT, and then kind of more so of how we approach an OT test, rather than getting bogged down in the ultra technical stuff. Because the approach to OT, in my opinion, is a bit more important than the approach you might take to other types of tests. And then I'll talk about, briefly, hopefully if I have time, a case study in South Africa where we did some OT testing on a few manufacturing factories. So, what is IT? What is OT? A few definitions, just to kind of, you may recognise some of these, you may not. But OT it refers to everything to do with large scale machinery, pretty much. Nothing big, huge physical machines that, it encapsulates all the monitoring, detection and control of physical processes and devices. Under that, you've got ICS, which is again a bit of a broad term for the terms underneath. So we have SCADA. Those are typically used for data collection and remote monitoring, and you'll typically find these on large-scale environments such as power lines, kind of really important critical national infrastructure. Distributed control systems, or DCS, these tend to be in more localized single plants, so you talk about manufacturing, oil refineries, power plants, and then you have programmable logic controllers, which kind of what it says in the tin. These are a bit more bespoke, and depending on where you're at, what factory, what environment you're in, these are all naturally programmed to do different things. Differences between OT and IT. I've kind of split it up into it's obviously in the real world way more broad than this, but I've tried to split it up into 5 main categories. So the purpose, IT, it's more about data processing and security. In OT, they focus on more the control and monitoring of physical processes, as I've said before. So we have an efficient and reliable industrial systems environment. These are, I talk with IT, more office and data centers, as we're all very aware of all those. Again, as you're probably aware, the technology you're interacting with is a lot more standardized. Your Windows, Linux, all the distributions, what you come across every day. In the OT environment, really, well, again, it kind of depends where you're at. It is quite broad. Bespoke, really specialized hardware and software, which comes with its own challenges, which we'll get to later on. Availability. This is more about the downtime. In the IT space, you can have downtime kind of whenever you want to do upgrades, or how many times do we get an email on a weekly basis saying, you can't access this system for the next 5 hours while we're upgrading it. Can happen in OT, but it depends where it is. Again, if you're thinking about nuclear reactors, how often can you just shut them down for 5 hours every other week? Again, which brings its own challenges, which is why the approach is different. Security focus, IT, very much about data security and authorization and confidentiality, integrity and whatnot. OT, very, very, very heavy on the safety side. I'm going to get into that in a little bit for obvious reasons. And patch cycle kind of goes with what I was saying about the specialized software and hardware and the lack of available downtime to upgrade things. Patch cycles can be few and far between in OT compared to your Windows. IT is all the time. Right, testing challenges. I briefly mentioned earlier on about how the approach is different, and just starting off with safety again, because I'll start by asking the question actually. This could be a CTF or in real life. Who has seen that there's a random computer running a really old operating system, and we all know the Metasploit? Who's through the Metasploit module at it? Raise your hands. Who's threw up without looking and you've knocked over a server? There's a lot of lies in the room, but I'll take it. Naturally, you can't really take that risk in OT, because if you do knock something over, you could risk physical harm, whether it be big robotic arms or hazardous waste leaks if something goes down. Again, moving on to the minimal downtime, I've kind of said already about stuff like that. Because you don't have much downtime in an OT system. Again, it can vary. If you look at a manufacturing plant, you get 2 weeks off in the summer, which is pretty standard in this country. Some might not be 24 hours, so you do have kind of time every now and then to upgrade things. But when you're looking at more critical national infrastructure, things are a bit more risky when it comes to shutting things down to do upgrades and stuff. Which kind of leads on to legacy systems. Because of that nature, there's a lot of outdated software and hardware with a lot of unpatched vulnerabilities, and that is pretty much because where do you have time to, as I've said, quite repetitive there, where do you get time to upgrade it? And because things tend to be very, very bespoke and specialised, it's not just the case of, well, we can roll that out to everyone who's got it plugged in across the board, all over the country or the world, wherever. So things are a bit more localised and a bit more specialised, so it's not as common to see regular updates all the time. And you also have the legal and the compliance side. Industries like energy, healthcare and transportation, they have their own strict regulations on when it comes to security testing and security itself. And particularly with some areas of OT, you do have industry standards what you need to oblige with when you're doing testing, and when you particularly bring the approach how you're going to test it. So given all those challenges, it's not the most straightforward test to do, but with a bit of planning and a bit of foresight and just a bit of take your time and be a bit more methodical with your approach, then you can still have a lot of fun, and it can still be, you can still find some really cool stuff. For my standards, I was dead impressed with this how it's going to tick round, which is very simple, but for my simple brain, took us ages to work out how to do it. But day one, naturally, you're going to be on site. You go in, meet your point of contact, and you get plugged into the network, which is typically going to be the IT network. And I know we're doing OT here, but it is really important to also do the internal IT network, because it kind of goes hand in hand with the next bit, which is one of the important bits of this testing is you want to see, because the OT should be working on its own internal network with no internet access for obvious reasons, but you want to find, is there any way of getting from the, even internet grade, you have a field there, but even internally on the IT system, is there any way of getting from there into this the local OT network? So to me, that's the all-important part of the test. Because of the risks that we've already outlined on the approach to how we're going to test it, sometimes you don't, strictly speaking, need to actually plug into the local network because of that risk of what can happen. Again, if you're in a manufacturing plant or an assembly line and things are okay, then you probably will plug in and have a little poke around. But again, you're going to do that really slowly. So your MMAP scans, you're talking top 5 ports, top 10 ports. You're not going to throw everything at it and then risk knocking something over. But because the risks of injury or kind of environmental dangers is a bit less of those in your normal manufacturing plants. So you might plug in, as I say, and you might see what you can do there. But if you're talking kind of more dangerous environments, critical national infrastructure, power plants, refineries, where you really can't take that risk, then you really want to focus on the segregation side. Because if there's no logical or physical entrance or way into that local network, then you might want to rethink about actually plugging into that local OT network itself. But because we're pen testers, we're always going to find a way in, whatever it may be. And that's why we'll normally have a plant walk. This is where you go onto the actual factory floor and you're in amongst the people with real jobs, doing stuff, making the country keep going. So you'll go there, and that's where you do all of your recon of the factory floor. So you'll be looking around here. Is any doors open? Is there a server room I can access? Is there any way I can logically or physically get access to some of these machines? And if you can, great. Then that's when you might think about plugging in to one of the PLCs, a HMI, anything with a USB port or not a USB port, an Ethernet cable port you can plug in and get access to that local network. And then when you're in, that's when you start thinking about the crown jewel. So what can you do theoretically? Can you shut down something? Can you accidentally break anything? Can you take over any sort of robotic arms or anything? I'm conscious of my time, so I'm going to move on quickly. When the fun starts, that's when you need to stop. So, as I mentioned in the last slide there before I moved over, that once you've realistically found an entrance into the OT network, then stop, and that's when you start thinking, right, what's the risk of of actually plugging in? What value do I add? And especially if there's no logical or physical way, realistically, that someone's going to get into that network, what value do I add by actually plugging in? Like, what's the risk to reward ratio? So that's kind of one of the big things you need to think about. Even if there is something kind of there, do I really need to plug in? I mean, hopefully the answer is yes, and you do some really cool things. Like, if the risk of the reward is like, we know what we're doing, there's no real danger of us plugging in, then obviously you're going to have some fun then. But just to really reiterate the approach of, do I need to be there? Because if something goes wrong, what can happen?
Don't you have to consider the insider threat,
though? You do, and that's why, particularly, that's where the physical side comes in. Because you're absolutely right, like, if someone has keys, yeah, they can go in, yeah, but it depends kind of who's going to go in there. But you're right, you're absolutely right, though. The insider threat is real. But again, that's when you weigh up that risk to reward. In a factory of manufacturing or assembly line where the risk of danger isn't all as much, then you might definitely plug in. But if you're talking about electric grids and power lines, then maybe it's not worth the risk. Conscious of time. So I'm going to move on lastly to the case study. So in May last year, a colleague and I, Liam Follen, you all know Liam? One of the crews running the track today. We went to Johannesburg to pen test 2 factories, and just to illustrate in a real world example of why we go through this, and you start the IT, the segregation and the OT. What we did was we went all the way, we started off, plugged into the network, do your normal scans, and then we found I'll start again. The reason why we do the IT side is because a lot of small, little vulnerabilities and misconfigurations can get to where you want, which is the OT side. So we found a printer which had all the usernames of who previously printed anything. We found on the SharePoint the default password for the company, sprayed that against everyone, and we found one that matched someone who hadn't changed it. So from there, we had a valid user account where we managed to scan kind of the whole network with it, and your crap map stuff, your standard IT internal infra stuff. And we found a switch which was dual NICed, where we managed to pivot through that into the OT side. And there, because we had that logical access to the OT network, essentially then we kind of had the OK to plug in, and yeah, we pivoted through, and we had full access of robotic arms. We had access to the APC, so we could have shut down everything essentially if we wanted to. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we had the crown jewels pretty early, and that was on both factories. And the best thing about it is on day one, I've run out. Day one, they were really cocky, and we still got in. And there's nothing there. No time now, but feel free to find me anywhere. Thank you.